"Little girls don't belong on my range," Sergeant Henderson sneered, making her shoot first to embarrass her. Sarah Chen fired 40 perfect shots while everyone watched. Then she pulled out her sniper school certificate. The same man who tried to humiliate her suddenly couldn't speak. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. The Texas sun blazed mercilessly over Camp Bullis as Private First Class Sarah Chen walked toward the rifle range with her M4 carbine slung across her shoulder. It was week 8 of advanced individual training for military police. And today was qualification day, the test that would determine whether she earned her badge or washed out of the program. At 19, Sarah looked younger than her age. Standing barely 5'3" with delicate features that reflected her Korean-American heritage, she often heard whispers about how she'd managed to make it through basic training. The other trainees were mostly men, most of them towering over her by 6 inches or more, and some made no secret of their belief that women didn't belong in combat-related fields. But what none of them knew, what Sarah had kept carefully hidden throughout her training, was the folded certificate tucked away in her personal belongings. A certificate that would change everything if they ever discovered what it represented. The range was already buzzing with activity when she arrived. Drill Sergeant Martinez was setting up targets while the other trainees checked their equipment and tried to calm their nerves. This wasn't just any qualification. This was the test that separated the professionals from the pretenders. "All right, listen up. Sergeant First Class Robert Bull." Henderson's voice boomed across the range like thunder. At 6'4" and 250 pounds of muscle, Henderson was exactly what central casting would order for an intimidating military instructor. His shaved head gleamed with sweat, and his arms were covered with tattoos that told stories of multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. Henderson had been the range officer at Camp Bullis for 3 years, and he took pride in maintaining the highest standards. He also took pride in something else. He'd never passed a female trainee on her first attempt. In his mind, women needed to be tested harder, pushed further, and proven more thoroughly than their male counterparts. "Today you prove whether you deserve to wear the MP badge," Henderson continued, his cold eyes scanning the assembled trainees. "The qualification course consists of 40 rounds fired at various distances and positions. You need 32 hits to pass. Miss more than 8 shots and you can pack your bags for reclassification." His gaze lingered on Sarah longer than the others. "Some of you might think this is just a formality. Some of you might think you can slide by on minimum standards." The contempt in his voice was unmistakable. "I'm here to disabuse you of that notion." Private Jackson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who stood 6'2" and had grown up hunting, raised his hand. "Sergeant, what's the average pass rate for first-time qualifiers?" Henderson smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "For male trainees with proper preparation, about 80%. For females?" He paused dramatically. "Well, let's just say the standards don't change regardless of political correctness." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the group. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt the familiar burn of determination that had carried her through every challenge in her young life. "Chen," Henderson's voice cracked like a whip. "Front and center." Sarah stepped forward, maintaining military bearing despite the knot forming in her stomach. Around her, the other trainees watched with expressions ranging from sympathy to anticipation. Everyone knew what was coming. "Private Chen," Henderson said, circling her like a predator, "your scores in marksmanship fundamentals have been adequate, barely adequate. Your weapon handling shows improvement, but I have concerns about your ability to perform under pressure." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "Tell me, Chen, do you think the enemy is going to go easy on you because you're a woman? Do you think the bad guys are going to aim for your center mass instead of your head because you look like somebody's little sister?" "No, Sergeant," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "That's right. They're not. Which is why I hold everyone to the same standard, the standard that keeps soldiers alive in combat." He gestured toward the firing line. "You'll be shooting first today. Everyone else gets to watch and learn from your mistakes." The message was clear. She was being set up as an example of what happens when standards are lowered to accommodate women. Henderson fully expected her to fail, and he wanted the other trainees to witness that failure as a lesson about maintaining military standards. Sarah moved to the firing line and began preparing her equipment. She checked her M4, verified her magazine was properly seated, and adjusted her protective gear. Around her, the other trainees gathered at the observation area, some looking nervous about their own upcoming attempts, others clearly eager to see the show. The course of fire begins with 10 rounds from the 300-meter line in the prone position, Henderson announced through a bullhorn. You have 2 minutes to complete this string. Load and make ready. Sarah dropped into the prone position, settling her rifle against her shoulder. Through her scope, the targets looked impossibly small, black silhouettes that wavered in the heat haze rising from the desert floor. 300 meters was a long shot for an M4, especially in these conditions. Commence firing. What happened next surprised everyone watching. Sarah's first shot rang out almost immediately, followed by 9 more in smooth, methodical succession. Each shot was deliberate, controlled, with just enough pause between rounds to allow for sight adjustment and breath control. She finished the string with 30 seconds to spare. Cease fire. Scorers, check your targets. A few minutes later, the results came back over the radio. Target 7, 10 hits, all in the 8 ring or better. 1 possible 10 ring. Henderson's eyebrows rose slightly. 10 hits out of 10 at 300 meters was solid shooting, especially for a trainee. But he wasn't about to let one good string change his assessment. Not bad, Chen. Let's see if you can maintain that when things get more challenging. The second string was 20 rounds from 200 meters, fired from both prone and kneeling positions. This required not just accuracy, but the ability to transition smoothly between positions while maintaining sight picture and trigger control. Again, Sarah's performance was flawless. 20 shots, 20 hits, most of them clustered in the center of the target. The other trainees began to murmur among themselves, recognizing that they were witnessing something exceptional. Henderson's expression was growing darker. This wasn't going according to script. The little Asian girl was supposed to struggle, to demonstrate why women didn't belong in combat roles. Instead, she was shooting better than most of his male trainees. Final string, he announced, his voice carrying an edge of frustration. 10 rounds from 50 meters, standing position, timed fire. You have 60 seconds to complete all 10 shots, including reloads. This was the pressure test. Standing unsupported, shooting as fast as accuracy would allow, against a tight time limit. It was designed to simulate the stress of close-quarters combat, where hesitation could mean death. Sarah stepped to the 50-meter line and took her stance. Around her, the range fell silent except for the distant sound of helicopters and the ever-present buzz of insects in the Texas heat. Commence firing! The 10 shots came out in a controlled burst of precision. Sarah's rifle barked steadily, each shot flowing into the next with mechanical rhythm. Her stance never wavered, her sight picture never faltered. She finished the string with 15 seconds to spare and calmly safed her weapon. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Finally, the radio crackled with the target results. Target 7, 10 hits, all in the 9 ring or better. 6 10 rings, 4 9 rings. A collective gasp rose from the watching trainees. 40 shots fired, 40 hits scored, with the vast majority clustering in the highest scoring zones. It wasn't just a passing score. It was a perfect score, the kind of performance that happened maybe once or twice a year. Henderson stared at the radio as if it had personally betrayed him. This couldn't be right. Female trainees didn't shoot perfect scores on their first qualification attempt. There had to be an explanation. Chen, he barked, present yourself for equipment inspection. This was irregular. Equipment inspections typically happened before shooting, not after. But Henderson was grasping for any explanation that would preserve his worldview about female capabilities. Sarah approached with her rifle at port arms. Henderson snatched the weapon from her hands and began a thorough examination, looking for anything that might explain her performance. Modified triggers, illegal optics, ammunition irregularities, anything that would provide grounds for disqualification. But the M4 was completely standard, showing only the normal wear expected from training use. The scope was regulation issue, properly zeroed but unremarkable. Even her ammunition was standard ball rounds from the same lot everyone else was using. Frustrated, Henderson moved to personal accusations. Where did you learn to shoot like that, Chen? Did someone give you private instruction? Did you practice on this range before the official qualification? No, Sergeant, Sarah replied calmly. I learned to shoot before joining the Army. Oh, really? And where exactly did a little girl from San Francisco learn precision marksmanship? His tone dripped with sarcasm and disbelief. Sarah hesitated for a moment. She'd hoped to keep her background private, to blend in with the other trainees and complete her training without drawing unwanted attention. But Henderson's aggressive questioning was forcing her hand. "Sergeant, I learned from my father. He taught me to shoot when I was 12. Your father, huh? And what did Daddy do for a living? Weekend warrior? Hunting enthusiast?" Henderson's voice grew louder, drawing attention from other ranges nearby. "Because last time I checked, civilian shooting and military marksmanship were two completely different things." The crowd of trainees had grown larger, with instructors and support personnel from other areas drifting over to see what the commotion was about. Henderson was playing to his audience now, using Sarah as a teaching moment about the dangers of lowering standards. "You know what I think, Chen?" Henderson continued, his voice carrying across the range. "I think somebody's been giving you special treatment. I think you've been getting extra instruction, maybe some private coaching that the other trainees haven't received, because there's no way a 90-pound girl shoots a perfect score on her first qualification without some kind of advantage." The accusation hung in the desert air like smoke from a firefight. Sarah felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger, but she maintained military composure. Around her, dozens of eyes watched and waited for her response. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "I can provide documentation of my training background if required." "Oh, you can provide documentation?" Henderson's laugh was harsh and mocking. "What kind of documentation? A certificate from some civilian shooting club? A trophy from a county fair competition?" Sarah reached into her cargo pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Her hands were steady as she unfolded it and handed it to Henderson. "My graduation certificate, Sergeant." Henderson glanced at the paper dismissively, expecting to see some amateur shooting course certificate or civilian marksmanship award. What he saw instead made his face go pale. The document was official military letterhead, embossed with the seal of the United States Army Marksmanship Unit. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "United States Army Sniper School, Fort Benning, Georgia." Below that, in precise military formatting, "This certifies that Specialist Sarah Monsieur Chen has successfully completed the U.S. Army Sniper course and is qualified as a military sniper in accordance with standards established by the U.S. Army Infantry School." The date was from 2 years earlier. The signature at the bottom belonged to the commandant of the infantry school. Henderson's hands began to shake as the implications sank in. This wasn't just any certificate. This was graduation from the most challenging marksmanship course in the military. Out of every 100 soldiers who attempted sniper school, fewer than 30 graduated. And of those 30, maybe 1 or 2 each year were women. "I don't understand," Henderson stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. "If you're a qualified sniper, what are you doing in MP training? Why are you a private first class?" Sarah's answer was quiet but carried clearly across the suddenly silent range. "I enlisted under the delayed entry program while I was still in high school, Sergeant. I attended sniper school during the summer between my junior and senior years through a special program for exceptional marksmen. When I graduated high school, I chose military police as my permanent MOS because I wanted to serve in law enforcement." The silence that followed was deafening. Henderson stared at the certificate in his hands, reading and rereading the details as if they might change. Around him, the other instructors and trainees processed what they had just learned. This 90-pound teenager wasn't just a good shot. She was a graduate of the most elite marksmanship program in the military. She had completed training that broke seasoned combat veterans, and she had done it while most of her peers were worried about prom dates and college applications. Drill Sergeant Martinez was the first to break the silence. "Specialist Chen," he said, using her correct rank for the first time, "why didn't you mention your sniper qualification during initial processing?" Sarah's answer revealed both maturity and wisdom beyond her years. "I wanted to be treated like every other trainee, Drill Sergeant. I didn't want special treatment or different expectations. I just wanted to do my job and serve my country." The crowd was growing larger as word spread through the base. Senior NCOs and officers began arriving, drawn by reports of the confrontation on the range. Among them was Sergeant Major Williams, the senior enlisted advisor for the entire training brigade. Williams approached Henderson, who was still staring at the sniper certificate in obvious shock. "Sergeant Henderson, what's the situation here?" Henderson tried to explain, but his words came out in a disjointed rush. The qualification? Perfect score. But she's just a private. I thought she was. Williams took the certificate from Henderson's trembling hands and examined it carefully. His expression grew more serious with each detail he absorbed. Finally, he looked up at Sarah with the respect due to a fellow professional. Specialist Chen, he said formally, I apologize for any unprofessional treatment you may have received. Your qualifications speak for themselves, and they reflect great credit on you in the Army. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in the presence of one of the finest marksmen in the United States military. Specialist Chen's graduation from sniper school represents an achievement that fewer than 1% of soldiers ever attain. The impact of Williams's words rippled through the crowd. Suddenly, Sarah wasn't the little girl who didn't belong. She was a certified expert whose skills exceeded those of virtually everyone present. The dynamic had shifted completely. Henderson, meanwhile, was experiencing a complete psychological collapse. His entire worldview about women in combat, about military standards, about his own expertise was crumbling before his eyes. The trainee he had tried to humiliate was actually more qualified than he was. Sergeant Henderson, Williams continued, his voice carrying the authority of decades in uniform. I think you owe Specialist Chen an apology. Henderson's face had gone from pale to red to pale again. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the afternoon heat being no worse than usual. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Specialist Chen, I apologize. I made assumptions that were unprofessional and unfounded. Your performance today was exceptional. Sarah accepted the apology with the same grace she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. Thank you, Sergeant. No harm done. But the damage to Henderson's reputation was irreversible. Word of the incident spread through the military community like wildfire. The story of the range officer who tried to humiliate a sniper school graduate became legendary, told and retold in training centers around the world. Within a week, Henderson was reassigned to a desk job at brigade headquarters. His replacement was a master sergeant who had served with distinction in multiple combat tours and understood that competence came in many different packages. Sarah completed her MP training with honors and went on to serve with distinction in multiple deployments. Her unique combination of law enforcement training and precision marksmanship made her invaluable in urban combat situations where surgical accuracy was essential, but the real impact of that day at Camp Bullis was broader than any individual career. The incident became a case study in military leadership schools, an example of how prejudice and assumptions could blind leaders to the capabilities of their subordinates. Sergeant Major Williams used the story in his leadership classes for years afterward. The moment you think you know everything about someone based on their appearance, he would tell his students, is the moment you stop being an effective leader. Sarah Chen taught us that competence doesn't always look like what we expect. 5 years later, now Sergeant Chen was serving as a squad leader in Afghanistan when she received an unexpected visitor. Henderson, who had left the Army after his humiliation and spent years reflecting on his mistakes, had joined a veterans organization that supported women in combat roles. Sergeant Chen, he said when they met at the forward operating base where she was stationed, I wanted to apologize again properly this time. What I did that day was wrong, and it took me years to understand how wrong. Sarah's response showed the same professionalism that had carried her through that day at Camp Bullis. Sergeant Henderson, we all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them. I've spent the last 3 years working with an organization that advocates for women in combat roles, Henderson continued. I tell your story, with your permission, to help other leaders understand the importance of judging people by their performance, not their appearance. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The man who had tried to use Sarah as an example of why women didn't belong in combat roles was now using her story to advocate for exactly the opposite message. Years later, when Sarah retired as a master sergeant after 20 years of distinguished service, the ceremony included remarks from officers who had learned leadership lessons from her experience at Camp Bullis. Her sniper school certificate, now framed and faded with age, hung in her office alongside commendations from 3 different combat tours. The lesson of that Texas afternoon lived on in the training programs, where future leaders learned that assumptions are dangerous, that competence comes in unexpected packages, and that the measure of a soldier isn't their appearance but their performance when it matters. most Henderson's attempt to humiliate, a little girl had instead revealed the extraordinary capabilities hidden beneath an unassuming exterior. In trying to prove that women didn't belong in combat roles, he had instead provided one of the most compelling examples of why they did. The range officer had humiliated her, or tried to. But Sarah Chen's sniper school certificate didn't just stun everyone present that day. It changed minds, challenged assumptions, and proved that excellence recognizes no boundaries except those we place on ourselves. In the end, the most important lesson wasn't about marksmanship or military training. It was about the danger of judging people by anything other than their capabilities, their character, and their commitment to mission accomplishment. Sarah Chen had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the rifle in your hands. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of achieving.